History has moments when injustice shows itself so blatantly, so shamelessly, that silence is no longer an option. And today, my friends, we are witnessing one of those moments. A moment that lays bare not just the flaws of a system masquerading as justice, but also the greed, the arrogance, and the cowardice of those who wield power without conscience. I speak, of course, of Judge Clarence Thomas, the same man who swore to uphold the law, the very law meant to shield the weak, the vulnerable, the oppressed. Yet, with one reckless decision, he dared to revoke my diplomatic status, Ibrahim Traoré. Pause for a moment. Let that sink in, because what I say next is not just rhetoric. It is the truth, a reflection of the sheer audacity and arrogance that only the most corrupt in power dare to exhibit. A judge, entrusted with the sacred duty of justice, with the solemn responsibility to uphold fairness and the rule of law, acts not as a defender of truth, but as a puppet, a pawn of influence, greed, and political games. A man who swore an oath to serve justice, yet twists that oath to serve hidden agendas, to protect the powerful, to silence those who stand for what is right. Imagine the gall, the shamelessness, the arrogance it takes to believe such a man could intimidate someone who fights for something far greater than himself. Someone who battles not for personal gain, not for wealth, not for comfort, but for the dignity, the sovereignty, and the very future of an entire nation. Let me tell you about Burkina Faso, my homeland, a nation that has endured decades, no, centuries, of foreign meddling. A nation that has borne the brutal weight of exploitation, the chains of dependency, and the relentless mockery of outside powers. Ours is not a story of weakness. It is a story of resilience. Our people have known hunger, oppression, and injustice. Yet through every storm, through every attempt to subjugate us, they have endured. And now here comes a man, a judge in a distant land, who dares to insert himself into this story, this legacy, and think he can diminish it. Diminish me. Diminish what we stand for. Clarence Thomas, seated in his chambers, draped in the robe of authority, believes that a piece of paper, a judicial decree, or the illusion of law can erase the strength, the voice, the resolve of a nation and its leader. But understand what this act truly signifies. It is not just an attack on me. No, that would be too small. It is an assault on sovereignty itself. It is a message, not just to me, but to every leader, every citizen, every nation that dares to claim independence. You are not truly free. Your power is granted only by those in distant seats of authority, and any defiance will be met with punishment. This is what Clarence Thomas tried to do. He sought to reduce Burkina Faso to a lesson in obedience and to make me an example of what happens when you refuse to kneel. But he miscalculated. He failed to see what we have always known. True power, true leadership, does not come from fear, from decrees, from empty threats. It comes from courage, from conviction, from the unbreakable will of a people united in purpose. Picture this: a man in a foreign land, behind thick walls, insulated from the struggles of those he claims to govern. He has no connection to our pain, our history, our fight. He sits in comfort while making decisions that ripple across the world, decisions that affect lives he will never see, communities he will never visit. And in that detachment, he believes he can strip me of diplomatic status, a symbolic act meant to humiliate, to erase my legitimacy, to weaken my voice. But here is the truth. Symbols mean nothing against action. Titles, decrees, rulings, they cannot touch what is real. They cannot break the bond between a leader and his people. They cannot shake the resilience of a nation that has faced far worse than the arrogance of a foreign judge. And let me be clear, this is not just about me or Burkina Faso alone. It is about the message such actions send to the world. When a judge, a man sworn to uphold justice, chooses instead to serve wealth and influence, when he bends the law for political ends, it sets a dangerous precedent. It tells the powerful they are untouchable. It tells the weak their struggles do not matter. It tells nations their sovereignty is conditional. But history does not forget such acts. And justice, real justice, has a way of exposing the lies behind these empty displays of power. Think about the arrogance it takes to see someone rising with strength, with vision, and assume you can stop them. Think about the fear behind that arrogance. Because let me tell you, Clarence Thomas's actions were not born of legal principle. They were born of fear. Fear that a leader, a nation, could rise on its own terms, without bowing to distant powers. Fear that Burkina Faso's voice could be heard globally without permission, without compromise, without surrender. And fear, as we know, is a weak foundation for authority. It leads to mistakes, to miscalculations, and ultimately, to regret. Here is a man with decades of experience, decades of influence, who should understand the weight of his actions, who should know that the power of the gavel is only as strong as the legitimacy behind it. Yet he acts recklessly, thinking he can diminish what he does not understand. He believes that by striking at me, he strikes at Burkina Faso, but he does not grasp that the spirit of a nation, the bond between a leader and his people, cannot be erased by a decree. Legitimacy is not granted by a piece of paper or a court ruling. It is earned through courage, through vision, through an unshakable commitment to defend one's people against oppression. And this is what makes the arrogance of such men so dangerous. They act under the illusion that the world bows to titles, to the facade of authority. They believe fear is universal, that respect can be forced, that obedience can be demanded rather than earned. But they forget, real power comes from action, from integrity, from standing when others flee, from defending what is right even when the world opposes you. And in that truth, they fail. They are blind to the reality that those who fight for dignity, for justice, for a nation's future, do not tremble at symbols. They act, they rise, they endure, and they prevail. So let us be clear. When Clarence Thomas tried to strip my diplomatic status, he was not just attacking me. He was trying to rewrite history, to claim that power belongs to those who wield it selfishly, not justly. He was sending a warning. Stand too tall, speak too boldly, resist too fiercely, and you will be punished. But he failed spectacularly, because the measure of a leader, the measure of a nation, is not what can be taken away. It is what cannot be broken. It is the spirit, the vision, the resilience, the courage that outlasts threats, decrees, and fear. And so, his action will not be remembered as an act of authority. It will stand as a monument to arrogance, to misjudgment, to fear disguised as law, because he dared to challenge what he could not comprehend. He dared to strike at a man whose legitimacy comes not from foreign approval, but from the people he serves. He dared to believe that strength could be halted by a piece of paper, by a declaration, by an attempt to strip dignity. But in doing so, he exposed himself. Not me, not Burkina Faso. He exposed the fragility of power built on fear, the hollowness of authority divorced from justice, and the limits of a man who has forgotten the meaning of his oath. So when we look back on this moment, let us not see it merely as arrogance. Let us see it for what it truly is, a lesson. A lesson in the audacity of those who think they can control what they do not understand. A lesson in the courage it takes to stand when the powerful lash out. A lesson in the truth that dignity, sovereignty, and justice are not negotiable. They are earned, defended, and upheld, even against those who wear robes and believe themselves untouchable. And let the world remember, titles, decrees, and courts cannot erase legitimacy. They cannot weaken courage. They cannot silence vision. Burkina Faso, my people, the cause we fight for, these cannot be cowed by fear, by corruption, or by the fragile ego of one man. Clarence Thomas, in his attempt, revealed more about himself than he ever could about me or my nation. And let me be clear, I do not speak to provoke. My words are not empty rage. I speak because silence in the face of such corruption is not neutrality. It is complicity. To stay quiet when a judge, a supposed guardian of justice, abuses his power for self-interest is to accept the very injustice we claim to oppose. And when Clarence Thomas, a man entrusted with the highest responsibilities of law, thought he could strike at me, thought he could strip my protections, he revealed not just his intentions, but his character. And that character, my friends, is not hidden behind robes or titles. It is plain for all to see, if they dare to look beyond the facade. What you see is fear, fear disguised as authority. Fear that a man like me, a nation like Burkina Faso, could rise independently, unapologetically, on the world stage. Fear that the truth could no longer be hidden, that the influence of those who have exploited and suppressed weaker nations for centuries would finally be challenged. And how did that fear manifest? not in reasoned argument, not in lawful debate, not in integrity, but in a reckless attempt to strip my status, to weaken me through an act of arbitrary power. And let us not mistake the arrogance behind this. Arrogance dressed in the language of law, in the pretense of justice. It is the arrogance of those who see power as a right, not a responsibility, who see authority as a shield for self-interest, not a tool for fairness. He cloaked his fear in judicial robes, hoping the world would see a judge acting on principle, not a frightened man acting in self-preservation. But we see through the illusion. We see the desperation, the alignment with power, the choices that always protect the few at the expense of the many. And we know his attack on me was not about law. It was about control, about enforcing submission, about reminding others that obedience is demanded, not earned. But it is more than arrogance or fear. It is betrayal, a betrayal of me as a leader serving my people, a betrayal of Burkina Faso fighting for sovereignty after centuries of interference, a betrayal of every person, every nation that has ever been denied justice. Think of the lives shaped or shattered by decisions made not out of principle, but out of selfishness, fear, or corruption. Every time justice is twisted, every time power is abused, the consequences spread far beyond one person. They touch families, nations, generations. So when he struck at me, he did not strike at one man. He struck at the idea that a leader could rise independently, that a nation could act with sovereignty, that justice could exist in its purest form. In that moment, he revealed his priorities, his loyalties, the fragility of his authority, because those who rule through fear see every act of true leadership as a threat, every stand for justice, every move toward independence, every decision made for the people is seen as defiance. And so he acted, not because it was just, not because it was right, but because he could not tolerate strength in someone he viewed as beneath him. And this, my friends, is the pattern we must recognize. Authority without integrity is fragile. Power without principle is unstable. Influence without justice is temporary. A man like Clarence Thomas,